Hello, good afternoon. Can everybody hear me? Yes? That was some Stevie Wonder as welcome counterpoint to a panel titled Love in the Face of Disease. I'm really pleased to be here today with Semezdin Mehmedinović and with Hanne Ørstavik for a conversation about different aspects of love as they appear in a couple of their most recent works. These two works, I think, are particularly strong for the representations of love as viewed through and expressed by the prism of illness. And as such, I think it's quite natural that caretaking and taking care play such a fundamental role in the stories that they tell. Both My Heart by Semezdin and Ti Amo by Hanne. And so I'd like to begin with a question for each of you about this particular aspect of taking care of love as being expressed through the care for another person who is in need of it. In Semezdin, we experience this from two perspectives in your book. The care that your narrator receives after his heart attack, with which the book begins, and then the care he provides to his wife Sonia after her stroke. And my question has more to do with, I suppose, writing than anything else, with method, the form that you found or created in order to depict that kind of love. The text is not quite a diary. It's not a memoir. It's not a fiction. It makes use of fictional devices, but it's not quite the obvious thing as a novel. It's got drawings in it as well. I don't want to ask you what it is, but I'm more interested in how you actually developed it.
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you all of you for coming. You know, like 2 minutes ago, this room was empty. You know, it happened in this kind of occasion. I used to have a friend, a famous American poet, Robert Creeley. He told me a story. You know, he visited college in America in a moment when they had important football games. And he showed up in a room like this, and there was just one guy in the audience. And they told him, okay, there's no reason to do this. Can we go to a restaurant and cancel this? And Robert said, no. There's one guy there, and I will read it. And he read for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, he watched the guy, and he was like, yes. And he said, you know what, I really enjoy your reading, but I was here for job appointment, and now it's time for me to go. And thank you for coming. I'm so happy that I was here. Like 3 days ago, I was so tired, and I thought I will cancel this. But yesterday, at the end, I decided to come, and I'm grateful for that. And that was an amazing sunny evening yesterday. I arrived, you know, in front of hotel, and from my room I saw lake and background with snow on mountain. It was so hypnotic that I go out and I sit on a wall and smoke cigarette, which is not okay, and nobody around me, nobody smoking, which is interesting.
There have been some authors smoking.
Yeah, but at that point I felt guilty doing this. And watch a lake. I have a connection with lakes because I grew up on a lake. I was born in northern Bosnia, in a town Tuzla, which is a miner city. My grandfather was a miner in a salt mine. My father was a miner in a coal mine. And my first memories are connected with a house close to a lake. But that lake was different than this one. That was artificial lake. few years before I was born, they built a dam, you know, and accumulate water for electric power plant. Okay, but lake was huge. Okay, and my first images are surreal from childhood. Yeah, like you can see top of roofs above a surface of water, or top of treetops above a surface of water. And I remember, and it was an iconic event from my childhood. I was in a boat with my father, and he jumped from a boat in the water to dive just to see remains of school in which he learned first letters. Okay, and I remember my childhood as a happy time, but in the same time, all these images create kind of melancholy that follow me all my life. And, you know, because my father was miner, as a kid I thought I'll be miner too. And maybe because of this melancholy, I become a writer, okay? And I think, going back to your question, I think from the beginning, I knew what is a model of writing for me. Yesterday in a train, I read the interview of Michael Ondaatje, amazing novelist and a poet. In that interview, he said, I'm a big believer in collage. I like to put quotes, descriptions, anecdote, different notes together. Because together they create kind of atmosphere that is a similar of atmosphere of memory. Okay, and memory is a
microphone.
I create real problem. Then we'll solve that. Yeah. And you know, this can be unpopular. I'll tell you something. I'm skeptical when it comes to human imagination. Or I'm skeptical when I think about my imagination. But to me happens something, you know, like too much life. And reality in my life show imagination that go beyond human imagination, okay? Especially I found that during the war. And, you know, I decide, you know, I will just describe what happened to me in my life. And and that's the reason, talking about form, that's the reason why forms of my books is a kind of hybrid in which I mix diaries, memoirs, and I want to mix different form, as Michael Ondaatje mentioned. You know, I put drawings, and if I can, in a book, I will go with a voice or with the music. Mm-hmm. And I, you know, when I think about this book, you can say it's novel, but in the same time it's memoir, okay? Mm-hmm. But also this is a book built from 3 different essays. Mm. Probably it's enough for me to talk right now. I will go back to this book later.
Hanne, I mean, for you, obviously, you're also incorporating, or maybe not so obvious, but it appears that you're incorporating autobiographical experience, which is, one can also say, happens in a novel, where ostensibly nothing seems to parallel the life experience of the author. But I suppose there's an account for the book's genesis in Ti Amo at some point, about the moment where the protagonist begins to think about it as a book, perhaps, as the writing begins to take a form. But that's also, I wonder, if there's something to separate between what we experience from the narrator and your own as the author.
Well, Daniel is talking about this tiny little book that's called Ti amo, which means I love you in Italian. And I wrote this book in January 2020. And the opening question was kind of how did the text find the form it has, no? And I was actually planning to write another novel. And then my husband, which I had met in 2016, and this was like for 3.5 years later, after 2 years of being together, he got pancreatic cancer, and he was going to die. And I lived next to him during that time, and I really loved him so much, and he didn't want to talk about death. So, and I, as a writer, the only thing I think writing for me is connected. I mean, I write because I really want to live, and I want to live a life that's true, and I want to live a life that has to do with love in some way, and that has been very difficult for me. So I think all my books are a bit about love in some way, about getting there. But for this, him not wanting to talk about death and us living together, and he was going to die, and how to live with a person you love more than everything, and you know that that person is going to die, and you cannot talk about it. And so the form of this text, that it's called a novel. I'll talk about that later. It's not so important what's it called, but what it's called. But after 1.5 years of illness, he was still alive. But I have been Googled all the information. I knew he was going to die, and we were at the hospital just around New Year's Eve, and they told me that there will not be another New Year's Eve for you two together. This will be the year when he will die. And that was so extremely painful, and it was just like that friction between that extreme pain and not being able to talk about it with him, because he didn't want to talk about it. It was his body, his illness, his pain, but it was also my life next to him. So I sat down I sat down one day to write, because it was just, the friction was so extreme hard. And I sat down to write, and I didn't know that I was going to write anything that was going to be published. And I started to write the text, and I wrote the first lines of the novel, which I would like to read. But I wrote the first lines, and when I will read them to you now. And when I had written them, I knew that, oh, but Hanne, no, you're not writing for yourself anymore. No, you're writing literature. This is not you anymore. And it was just a feeling, and it was also a big liberation to feel that, because then the text in some way took over, and I could lean into the text, and the text became a hand that said, come, talk to me, I'm here with you. And I don't really, I think it's hard to kind of explain what it is, what the difference is between that knowing in the body, that no, I'm actually writing literature. It's something else than writing in my journal. I wish my journals will never be published. They're so trashy. But real writing is, it's like there is something sacred in it that is so cutting through. And that cleanness of it is so, it kind of, it opens for something that kind of gives life. I don't know how to say it. But I would like to, can I read now? I will just read the first lines that I wrote in Norwegian. I will read them in Norwegian so you hear, because I changed the pitch of my voice so extremely when I talk English. So I will read this in Norwegian first. Jeg elsker deg. Vi sier det til hverandre hele tiden. Vi sier det i stedet for å si noe annet. Hva skulle det andre ha vært? Du, jeg holder på å dø. Vi, ikke gå fra meg. Jeg vet ikke hva jeg skal gjøre. Før, jeg vet ikke hva jeg skal gjøre uten deg, når du ikke er her mer. Nå, jeg vet ikke hva jeg skal gjøre med disse dagene, denne tiden, hvor døden er det mest synlige i alle ting. Jeg elsker deg. And then I will read it in English. I'm extremely grateful for translations, but they are also so translated. I love you. We say it to each other all the time. We say it instead of saying something else. What would that something else be? You, I'm dying. Us, don't leave me. Me, I don't know what to do. Before, I don't know what I'll do without you when you're not here anymore. Now, I don't know what to do with these days, all this time in which death is the most conspicuous of all things. I love you. I'll just go on and read the first. I love you. You say it in the night when you wake up in pain or between dreams and reach out for me. I say it to you when my hand finds your skull, which has become small and round in my palm now that your hair is almost gone, or when I stroke you gently to get you to turn over and stop snoring. I love you. Once I would reach out in the night to touch your skin, to place my hand on your back, your stomach, your thigh, anywhere at all, and there'd be connection, contact. And in that feeling of skin and warmth, something small and without language, something perhaps undeveloped in me, a newborn part, could sink down to sense the base of night, return home, or arrive. I love you. But you are no longer in your body. I don't know where you are, awash in morphine. You drift in and out of sleep or languor, and we do not talk about death. I love you, you say to me instead, and reach out for me from the bed on which you lie through the days, fully dressed, writing on your phone, writing a novel on that little screen, 2 or 3 lines at a time before we drift into sleep again. And I let go of the door frame and step towards you and take your hand and look at you and say, I love you too.
I want to ask a question about, you mentioned fidelity to truth, or the need to be truthful or veracious in depicting the experience that you were undergoing. The fact that there was a difficulty in his denial of the death before him that you wanted to somehow confront, or that you had a need to work with and through. And the act of writing about this experience, which is to say, to be close to somebody who's in a state of physical weakness or decay. I'm reminded of a memoir by Philip Roth, Patrimony, about his dying father, and in particular the challenge of representing in writing these moments of terrible vulnerability of somebody who's been hospitalized, of somebody who may not be in control of their bowel movements, right? A loved one in those kinds of circumstances. Because the moment that you write, as you say, it becomes something other than oneself. It becomes something that potentially would be published, that potentially belongs to other people, and therefore may be a moment of exposure. And I suppose I'm curious about the process of negotiating that. I suppose on the one hand, right, I think Philip Roth describes it as almost indecent that he's taking notes even as he's undergoing these experiences. Even as his father is dying month by month, the writer in him won't sit down, is observing, is writing. And I suppose I'm curious as to that same process of transformation when you have that proximity, and then of course there's the need at the same time to be telling the truth about what you're undergoing. It's not to say that it can't be transformed or distorted or set at a certain distance by writing. I think inevitably that's the case, even if you try to be documentary. But are these things that concerned you as you were writing? Self-censorship, or perhaps the question of like what to omit, what to include?
Well, to be honest, I think that is the big kind of gratefulness I always have towards my writing and my novels, that they know. I follow them. And I think also it is the kind of the big schisma between what is your aim in writing? I mean, where do you write from? If you kind of take notes then you're kind of, you know, knowing that you're going to construct something. And I think in my writing, I work totally differently. It's like the writing, I don't rewrite. The writing is the material, and it's kind of like making a sculpture. You take it, it's already there. You take it out, and I think that what I want to do in my novels is it's not to impress, it's not to be brilliant, it's not to show a big thought about something, it's to be there. It's really to be there in the language and kind of some way make the language so transparent that reading makes that's at least my aspiration and how it feels when I write it and when I read it myself as a first reader of my own text. So to be there, to make the language so transparent so that me as a reader, and hopefully after it's published, whoever has the same will or need, I mean, to get to that other place where you can feel it, where you don't look at it anymore, but you're there in the reading, even though what I write about in this book is not something you have experienced yourself. And I think that also has, that has a lot to do with many layers of language. It also has to do with what kind of words do you choose, what kind of layer of when I write, I really kind of want the words to be as big and open as possible, so that there's space to move in them. And I think that is kind of something else than kind of, you know, And that is also a very kind of a precise language. But it's another kind of precision than a very kind of brilliant thought. So it's really kind of what are you after in literature, but also in life. I mean, we read for life, don't we? So it's kind of how are you in the world? I think that kind of reflects also how you relate, what you read and how you read, and what you write and how you write. Yeah.
Semezdin, did you feel challenged in any way about writing around things?
No, I'm challenged, in a way that, as I told you, when something important happened to me, I try to describe that, and when heart attack happened to me, I described it few days after that.
And this is how the book opens, is with the description of his own heart attack.
Now, this book I create by chance, like first part I wrote in November 2010. Second part I wrote in May 2015. And third one in April 2016. And they were, at that time when I wrote that, totally unconnected. Now, for second and third part, I wrote that just for one reader. I was in art at that time, and I tried to, to mix drawing and text. And after my heart attack, a few years after that, I was, visiting my cardiologist and asking, is there any way to quit all this medication, because I'm scared of them. They are heavy. And he told me, no, wait. You have to keep that till the end of your life. And I asked him, about side effects of this. And he told me, yes, there is a few side effects, unimportant. And I asked him, which kind of side effects? And he said, let's say memory loss. And I was like, whoa, I'm a writer, I'm dependent of memory. And yes, but, you will not die because of that. That's what, yes, I told him, but if I can't recognize face of my child, that's a death, okay? For me, it's the same. At that point, I thought, okay, I have a kind of problem with memory. Like, I remember faces, and I have a struggle to remember names. And I try to find a way to check that. When we moved in the United States, we spent a few months in Arizona. That was a quite change, coming from war and snow in Zagreb, in a sunny desert in Arizona. It was winter, February, 96, it was like paradise. There was a smell of orange trees, and really paradise. And in a way, I felt nostalgic for that time. Now I'm talking 20 years after. I decided to go in Arizona to check all these important places for me and, compare what they are really and how I remember them. And to spend some time with my son, he was there at that time, and talk with him about our past. And I was there in May 2015, in Phoenix, but also we travel around through the deserts in Arizona, Utah,
These
Nevada.
are the scenes that appear in the latter half of the novel, yes.
And my idea was, at that point, to write a text or book for one reader, which is my son. son-father, usually it's a very complicated relationship. There was some things I can't tell him in conversation. And I tried to put something in that text to tell him that is important for me. One of things that are really important for me, that to clean something, During the siege of Sarajevo, I kept my family in a city. I thought, if we are together, it's a bigger chance to survive, which happened probably true, but 4 years under the siege was too much, okay, and I kept kid, and I feel guilty, and we moved in United States because, when we moved to Zagreb after war, I thought we'll stay for a few months just to recover, to rest the bodies, and return back to Sarajevo, and but he told me, I want to study film. Not just film. I want to move to United States to study film there. And I was ready to follow him. That's the reason why we moved there. And I want to talk something about that in that book. During the process, driving around the west part of United States with him, I did all this writing, which means in present time, okay? And I do all this drawing in the present time. When we are done, I gave him this book, and I told him, okay, this is for you. You can do whatever you want. You can burn it, you can film it, because he was in a film. Do whatever you want. I want you just to read it, okay? And I forgot this. When things happened with my wife, which is a stroke, in April 2016, which is exactly a year after, it was a very similar story you told us, Like, Joanne Didion had that amazing memoirs book, Year of Magical Thinking.
Joan Didion, yes.
About that of her husband, yeah. And the whole book was based on that notion that, we are unprepared on a sudden change. Okay, what happened with my experience or my wife's experience is that kind of problem. It's Saturday, rainy Saturday, we were drinking coffee, everything was nice, we were joking. 2 minutes after, she started to scream, and there was a pain in her left arm. I called 911, ambulance show up. 2 hours after, in emergency room, they had a struggle to establish diagnosis. Okay, they didn't have a clue what happened to her, and she's in pain and still in pain. And they moved her at the Department of Oncology in a hospital. I was crazy at that point, I was our marriage was 35 years old. Okay, I knew her, and this is the closest person for me. I was not ready for what happened, which means to lose her. I was, crazy 2 days. I create a lot of problems for these people, medical people, and at a Monday, which means 2 days after, they established diagnosis. Diagnosis. Like a lot of small strokes happen at the end of micro nerves in her left brain, which affect her right side. Pain in the right arm and pain in the inner leg. And that was because, in this book, I was in different topics important for me, like memory, like identity, Yeah. And there was one moment that's, you know, important for me. Morning in which doctor asked her usual question for patients like her. Which day is, which month is, what's the name of city in which, you know, things like that. And she couldn't answer. You know, she just, you know, didn't remember that. And there was a moment when doctor asked her, and who is this guy? Showing me, and I was sitting beside her bed. And she was looking at me, and, you know, like it's cold. You know, for me, it was clear that she can't recognize me. And after, let's say, 4 or 5 seconds, she started smiling and says,
that's the Semezdin, my Semezdin.
My Semezdin. Okay, and I have this complicated name, and I live with this name, and I have this complicated identity. I'm coming in from a part of the world in which identity is something connected with religion or ethnicity, which is totally unimportant for me. I have, you know, 1,000 different elements from which my identity is built. But in this moment, I found that this is my real identity. That's me.
Your name had been filled with her affection for you and the recognition.
Exactly. Yeah. And now, then second part of consequences of this stroke is a memory loss. Memory loss was, you know, really complicated. Like, she lost recent memories, which means she couldn't remember what happened in the last 4 or 5 years. Okay. But at that point, I was so happy that she will survive. It's not cancer, but just a stroke and just memory loss. You know, I thought I will find a way to rebuild her memories. And idea was to start to write diary for her and read her at the end of the day, what happened to her. Because at that point, she will remember what happened 5 minutes ago. Okay? And I did that for 5 months. Every day I wrote a diary. Okay? And we have that as a ritual. At the end of the day, I will read what happened that day, but we'll go back for other days. And you know, it happened that partially it affected, you know, I saw effect. Like it helped her to organize her life to live with what she had. And she still have a problem with the arm, constant pain in her arm, and she still have a struggle with memory. Okay.
If I may, I'd like to read a passage.
Okay.
About
Can I just say a few more things? Then, you know, when I said this book was, you know, I published right by chance. You know, after I finished this diary, stopped writing this diary, I saw this real stuff. This is a good thing. I added that with idea to publish this with my memoir about my heart attack. And also I thought, you know, this book, I sent it to my son, is totally connected with this because I'm talking about the memory in all of them, and that's how this book happened.
It's interesting. There's this. I'm going to read you a passage from one of these scenes where he's trying to practice reminding Sanya, see what she can actually recall. Very brief passage here. The sound of scanning the barcode on her plastic wristband is accompanied by the question, name and date of birth? She says nothing. What year is this? Asks the doctor. She says nothing. What month is it? She says nothing. I ask her, who wrote the line, April is the cruelest month? And she says, T.S. Williams. It's interesting that she has merged T.S. Eliot and William Carlos Williams into one person. There must be a specific reason for that, but I'll think about that later. Now I hurry to put her right. Not Williams, but E. And she says, Eliot, T.S. Eliot. In other words, she can't remember the calendar year or the month in which we are now, but she does remember a line from a poem and the name of the poet. When we were left alone in the room, she became a child seeking attention, saying, I was in such pain this morning. What was hurting? I asked anxiously. I can't remember now, but something must have hurt. And I think it's interesting because there's also, of course, a bit of overlap with the previous talk in Hisham and the place that reading has in transforming our own identity and our sense of self. And even in the most literal sense, that in Ti Amo is the story of a writer and a publisher and, in part, a book fair in Mexico, that these are circumstances that end up informing the selves who inhabit these fictions, the act of reading. And even in this case, something like a line from a poem can actually be the thing that is anchored in the self when the day of the week is no longer there. I wanted to ask a question before we run out of time about location, about place and language, and perhaps whether or not the word love is even appropriate. There's an interesting parallel here in that Ti Amo is a novel written in Norwegian by a Norwegian author in Italy. And of course, it has an Italian title to express that love, but it's set in that location. My Heart is set in the United States by somebody who has left Sarajevo and travels around and brings his family there. These are writers who are sensitive to language, who are continuing at some level to write in the language of their originary country. Could you say something about, at least for your work, this particular, I don't know if it's a tension, if it's an affection, if the relationship between the language you inhabit on a day-to-day basis and how fruitful or frustrated it is by its difference from the language that you write in?
Oh, can I answer? Yeah, of course. I mean, this is a perfect solution for writer. You are in other culture. You are in different language. I was in Alexandria in Virginia, and it's 3 in the morning. I'm totally in my text writing in a language, and probably nobody in that city have no understanding of that language. That kind of anonymity I really enjoy in the United States. Second thing, you know, I describe things that happen to me in English language, okay? And writing is a process of translating in my language, Bosnian language, okay? And that process makes me more concentrated on a process, okay? And also makes me more sharp in a way that in my mind, I don't have just Bosnian readers. I have American readers too. I write in a way to be understandable in both languages. My translator in the United States, Amil Alcala, used to say, for me it was so easy to translate this. It was like sipping water from one glass to another. Probably that's the reason for that. Česlav Miloš called that second eye, okay? Like you can compare these things. And also, you know, we offer this, all this is, you know, all these topics we are in, and they are really connected with memory. In a way, you know, I'm obsessed with memory. Hisham, in one moment, he mentioned that, you know, like with the time, we have that problem, you know. It's like, you know, there is a lot of days that we can't remember. You know, there is a small amount of time that we remember. I remember, you know, like he went from 2000, November, I was in DC, and I received an envelope from police, DC police. And I opened, and there was a speed ticket. But strange speed ticket, they started that month with this kind of, you know, like on a paper, you have a photo of your car, and you have all info, you know. And, you know, I drove 50 miles in, you know, and there is, you know, it's okay. But, you know, I watched this photo. It was, they took that photo 7 days before, okay? I watched that photo, and I see street and everything. I try to recognize in which part of city I was at that moment, okay? And I couldn't recognize that, you know. And also I start to think, what happened to me 3 days ago? And there was no moment. There was no moment that I remember, which means we remember so small part of, you know, time from our life. And, you know, and that pushed me more deeply in a form of memoirs and diary. I'm a big believer in a diary because of that. Now, like an hour ago, I have a really interesting dialogue with the photographer. We have that sense, you know, for portraits, and we talk about photography and how it's changing time. You know, this month I heard a story from a friend. I met a friend, and he told me a story that is really, you know, I'm connected with this story. When war started in Bosnia, you know, in siege of Sarajevo, we need to move from apartment in which we were, apartment building was on a no man's land, okay? And when we moved, you know, we forgot our, you know, personal photography, you know. And, you know, for 2 years, we were in a problem, you know. There was always, you know, what we'll do with these photographies, you know. It's like we lose our past because we lose all these photos. And at the end, I return and pick up this photo. This month, I met a friend who was a musician, and when the war started, he escaped from his apartment in occupied part of Sarajevo. It's called Grbavica. He stayed for 2 years in a free part of city. He moved in London. And when war started, first day he traveled back to Sarajevo just to see what happened with his apartment, because there was a lot of stuff he was connected. And there was nothing, you know, empty apartment, nothing, except shoebox with photos. And he was so happy. All these personal photos are there. He picked that and hugged shoebox, you know. And, you know, like people who used to be there and stole everything that is important for them, but they don't stole something that is important, most important for him. And, you know, for some reason, we believe, you know, like when we took a photo that this is a document of your existence, okay? And now in books, photography is, you know, invented in 19th century, at the end of 19th century, which means we are talking of 2-3 generations. Now in bookstores or antique stores, you can find a lot of old photos, you know, and you can buy them. And there was a people on these photos, and they look in a camera, and they're smiling. They believe that they are, you know, doing that to have a document of their existence, and you know, and nobody knows anymore who these people are. They are totally forgotten, which means in these days, you know, with all this selfie culture, you know, and with all this, you know, probably time is a dangerous thing. Probably everything will be forgotten. We are smiling in front of camera, but at the end it will go in forgetting.
Time is a dangerous thing. I would like to answer your question too, if there's still time.
Yeah.
Good. First, I just want to say that I'm so grateful that I wrote this book, and I didn't say that before, but I wrote it half a year before my husband died. So I wrote it during 10 days, and it's kind of, the text is exactly how I wrote it. It's all here. And it was such a gift to have that text, because I had said everything to you in the text, so I could leave my writing room and be with him outside. And know that here I had said what I had to say, in a way. So it held my hand. And then you asked about language and living in kind of exile in some way, or having two homes, or whatever you call it. For me, it's like Norway and Italy. And I think it has kind of a parallel to that kind of, that double thing that we really want to be seen, and then you don't want to be seen. I think that living in Italy, it's wonderful, because nobody knows who I'm really. And I can just talk and make a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't really matter, because I'm something else. I always have that distance between the outer me in Italy and something else, and I don't really know what that something else is. But I know that in some way I really like that distance and that freedom and the moving space it gives me, because there's something that is not defined, and they cannot really hold me. They cannot kind of, you know, here is you, because they don't know. My language is something else, and they haven't written all my I only have 3 novels translated into Italian, and I have written so far 16 novels, so there are so many of my works that are not available. And on the other hand, that is also a big sorrow when I'm in Italy, because they don't know who I am. And of course they know who I am, because who are we? You are occupied with memory. I think I'm occupied with presence. Really kind of, we are this. We are looking into each other's eyes in this very moment. And being in Italy and kind of, so it's an extreme double thing that I'm free and I'm lonely. I'm seen in the presence whenever that is possible with someone. And then there's so much of my history and what is my kind of baggage, that is my novels, that are kind of inaccessible. And that is kind of both painful and wonderful. at the same time, and it kind of floats. So that's good. And it's also going back to Norway. And, you know, there all my novels are accessible. But what do they really know? I mean, what can you know? So one thing is kind of, I think more and more all this talking, all this kind of language is, I think for me, writing is kind of to get out of the talking, out of and into the, now it really became talking here. I don't really know how to say it, but when someone has written my novel, they don't have to say anything to me. If they really want to kind of communicate something to me, their look is enough. It's enough to kind of to be present with the presence of the novel inside both bodies. We have been there. It's a shared experience, and it's unshareable, and I don't know where I started, and that's where I ended right now. But I really want to kind of say something about, there is more and more, I find there is something sacred in the beauty and the truth of art that is so deep and so wonderful. And I'm so grateful to be here today with you too, and with all of you, and kind of to be able to kind of dip into that glimmering of that thing that we all kind of have somewhere inside. And I think, I mean, that we kind of long to be with or long to share, no? So yeah, thank you.
Apropos of reading as a place of communion, there are all these titles, both of the books that they were talking about are here in English, and there are also French translations of other works, including your earlier novel, Love, which I saw upstairs as well. So I would encourage you, if you do have a question or you do want to speak to them, not only get your book signed, but you can also ask the question there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Semezdin. Thank you so much, Hanne.
Thank you.